Coming up, voters in New Mexico will decide on a ballot initiative affecting Native children's education in November. And the Haudenosaunee continue their quest to the 2028 Olympics. Plus, we're breaking down the January 6th hearings. I am Aaliyah Chavez. Join us for those interviews, plus headlines from the ICT Newscast.
This program is made possible in part by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, a private corporation funded by the American people.
Arizona State University welcomes 3,500 Indigenous students from Arizona and across the nation. It serves one of the largest populations of Indigenous students among U.S. colleges and universities. We created a sense of place for tribal nations to create futures of their own making through community outreach and research, taught by world-class Indigenous faculty where they see a reflection of themselves and their experiences. Find community at ASU.
This is the ICT Newscast with Aaliyah Chavez.
Ku'atsi Hopa. Thank you for joining us. We start in North Dakota, where tribal nations are in a legal battle with the state over redistricting. Last week, a federal judge denied the state's request to throw out a lawsuit brought on by two tribes. The tribes allege that the state's new legislative map dilutes the voting strength of tribal citizens. The lawsuit was brought on by the Turtle Mountain Band of Chippewa and the Spirit Lake Tribe. Together, they claim the state's new map packs tribes into a single House district, and because of that, it violates the Voting Rights Act. The state argued that tribes lacked the standing to sue them, but the judge didn't agree, saying tribes, quote, do have standing to protect voting rights of its members. State officials have not said anything about the issue, saying they do not comment on ongoing litigation. Up next, tribal leaders say they look forward to the opportunity to continue fighting for Native voting rights. Staying in North Dakota, the Mandan, Hidatsa, and Arikara Nation is pursuing plans to sell captured flared gas from oil rigs. In the tribe's territory, the rigs flare off millions of dollars worth of natural gas annually. Captured flare gas from the MHA Nation could be sold to gasification plants and converted to hydrogen. There is a federal initiative to wean the nation off fossil fuels and use hydrogen as a main source of energy. This would have an immediate impact on energy-intensive industries like transportation, steelmaking, and fertilizer manufacturing. According to a statement from MHA partner Mitsubishi Power, the project could create the largest producer of clean hydrogen in North America. An Indigenous artist is helping to redesign a Toronto Blue Jays-inspired jersey for Native nonprofits. Mohawk citizen Corey Parkin has been reimagining the logo of his mom's favorite Major League Baseball team since 2016. The newest version of his design draws inspiration from the Haida Nation. The unofficial jersey features a Mohawk word for Toronto that means where there are trees standing in the water. On the front are the words for Blue Jay. The back has a term of endearment that translates to the blood that flows belongs to you. ICT spoke to Parkin about the Mohawk words on the jersey.
I wanted to turn the words into the Dagaranto Deri Deri as being the translation of, I guess, Toronto and Blue Jay for the East Coast, the Mohawk people, but also include the West Coast and just give that element that any Indigenous person or anyone that wants to support Indigenous people has that they can wear.
Proceeds from the jersey will support Indigenous charities First Water and Dreamcatcher Foundation. Both Native nonprofits are working to provide clean water to First Nations communities. Well, the next generation of Native dentists and pharmacists are receiving millions in funding. The Northwest Native American Center of Excellence at Oregon Health and Science University is receiving a total of $3.4 million over 5 years. The funding comes from the Health Resources and Services Administration, which is an agency within the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. In an effort to address health disparities, the center will expand its medical and dental and program pathways. To encourage Natives to consider working as pharmacists, the center will also use some of its new funding to conduct pharmacy-focused educational campaigns and advance Native recruitment. After hundreds of submissions, the Alaska Contemporary Art Bank has chosen the best artists in the state. Over 800 applications were received by a total of 194 artists, but only 14 were selected for this year's editions. Among them is Aleut Athabaskan and Inupiaq artist Danielle Larson. She makes art inspired by her Alaska Native roots. Larson became an artist after her father died. She told ICT this motivated her to pursue her passion in hopes of impacting her community.
I'm just excited that one of my pieces are going to go into an official collection that will be seen by different people, hopefully all over the state.
Larson hopes her work helps bring people nostalgia of family and good memories. And those are the headlines for the ICT Newscast. Coming up, we learn about Native education in New Mexico, and the January 6th insurrection hearings continue. But first, the Haudenosaunee are marching towards their goal of representing their nation at the 2028 Olympics. Stay with us. The Haudenosaunee lacrosse teams are continuing their march towards the 2028 Olympics by playing in the World Games. Joining us today are Claudia Jimerson and Rex Lyons. Claudia is the Director of Lacrosse Operations for the Haudenosaunee National Women's Team, and Rex is the Director of the Haudenosaunee Nationals Development Group. Welcome to you both.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Yes.
Claudia, let's start with you because the women's team played for the first time yesterday. How did they do?
Well, we're coming off of a 10-day tournament in the Women's World Championship. So, they still had to get their legs out from underneath them and get them warmed up. So they're pretty beat up, so to speak. So, but they played, they played good. They hung in there. They had to do a quick adjustment going from the women's 12v12 to the sixes format. So they fought hard. Unfortunately, we came out with a loss against Israel 17-10, which that team, talking to their director, brought a whole new fresh legs in for this tournament. So it's hard to compete against.
And Rex, give us an update on how the men's team did.
Yeah, they did fairly well. It was a little toasty down here. We came in fifth place. We beat Australia to come in a solid fifth place. Japan was pretty outstanding, I'd have to say, but our men did well, and it was an adjustment period, like Claudia said. One of our challenges is getting our athletes together, in preparation for these events. A lot of times they don't even get to play together until the first game, and that's something we really have to address.
Absolutely. I mean, Claudia, I want to go back to you because the Haudenosaunee actually play lacrosse in a different way than everyone else. Tell us about those differences.
Well, the biggest thing is, the close quarter play. We're a little bit more creative on. Sometimes we can be a little too creative when the shot's right there in front of us to go overhand. But it's just I feel like our players go by what they feel. They got the better stick skills, the softer hands. They're more creative. They have the higher IQ. So that's really what our players bring to the game as far as strength goes. Fitness wise, those are things that we need to work on, getting ready for grueling games. This is the first time we ever went back to back for World Championship right into the World Games. So I'm sure all the women have a huge, rude awakening right now because it takes a toll. Some of them are coming off their college season. So that's even more so, pretty heavy on the body. So we know now going into, if we run into this again, what we need to do to prepare for it. But overall, it's been a great experience. The women are bonding, they're getting together, going on 3 weeks together. That's a lot. So, sometimes you just got to give them space too. So it's been pretty good thus far.
Rex, I opened this interview with talking about the ultimate goal being the 2028 Olympics. Tell us about the plan to get there and, how you're gaining support along the way.
Well, it's interviews like this that are very helpful, getting the word out into all of our brother and sister nations across Turtle Island, to help support us. Because as you know, the Olympics is going to be a very expensive endeavor. And we just need all this support to, to really be successful. I think the boys got a good glimpse of it at the opening ceremony. It was an extraordinary event. Excuse me. And the boys were taking videos and they were getting a lot of shout outs from back home, and just the pride that was, resonating across all the homelands and across Turtle Island was extraordinary. So they're getting a real understanding of the magnitude of what this really is leading towards.
Absolutely. I mean, Claudia, you mentioned that you all just played Israel. When you're talking to other coaches and other teams who come from different countries and parts of the world, what are you learning from them, and what kinds of conversations are you having in terms of, as I mentioned, hopefully making it to the Olympics?
Well, there's a number of things. Most of all, people want to know about our people. So they have a lot of questions about our culture, where the game comes from. Every child matters. We make sure that we have that on full display so people understand our history. So a lot of it is them asking us questions. From a performance standpoint, I'm asking them questions, as far as like, well, how often do you guys get together? Do you have a new roster? What is your passport process? Because every country is different, including ours. So, how do you have that big old pool of players? And for us, it's very limited. They have, some people have, hundreds of players to choose from. We have, less than 70. So it's really tough for us to try to make sure we're building the best team with the, best stick skills, most fitness, athletic. So I'm asking them questions as far as, okay, well, what do you do? Because we can always be better. So we don't know everything. We just always got to work towards, okay, what everybody's doing. There's always a trend, right? So we want to make sure we're on top of it and we get ahead of it so we're ready for the next one.
Absolutely. I mean, Rex, you just talked about this, but it seems like there's a lot of pride and support that games like the World Games, bring to the Haudenosaunee. Maybe talk about how much that support is needed moving forward, and what you talked about this already, but what people can do to continue that.
Sure. As I said, it brings a lot of pride to all Indigenous. I mean, this is what's happening down here in Birmingham. I'm watching the local TV programs. There's a lot of media here, and they're really focusing on being the only Indigenous nation ever to compete in a World Games. So that says a lot, especially as Claudia mentioned. We're always participating at a deficit. Just numbers alone, puts us at a disadvantage. Just sheer numbers. It's really something that is extraordinary for us to be. Even the women just came up 5 notches and they're 8th in the world this year, which is extraordinary when you think about the numbers, in relation to some of the countries. I know USA has over 500,000. This is just the men's, 500,000 athletes to choose 26 players, and Canada has 250,000. Where we on a good year will have 140 period, not thousand. So it's our reverence for the game that allows us to field world-class teams, but like Claudia said, when you have small numbers, if you have an injury, something like that, it really takes a big toll on your team, and we're clearly at something that we have to address. We're hoping to get a little bit of flexibility and opening up, to all Indigenous nations, which we are. That's something that we really want to express, that if there's someone that's playing lacrosse who's not Haudenosaunee and they have they're elite lacrosse players, they, by all means, we're allowed to carry 3 non-passport carrying lacrosse players, and we do. And we always try to take advantage of that, and we're going to be asking for more, just so that we increase our player pool.
Well, we'll continue following your story, and hopefully some more wins in the future. Rex and Claudia, thank you so much.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Yep.
When voters in New Mexico head to the polls in November, they'll see a question about a new initiative to support Native education. Source New Mexico's senior reporter Sean Griswold recently filed a story about this and is back to tell us more. Hi, Sean, great to see you.
Hello, thanks for having me.
At a high level, set this story up for us. What do we need to know about this ballot initiative?
So the ballot initiative in New Mexico is looking to boost additional funding for education programs, K through 12, as well as pre-K education groups here in New Mexico. The effort is led by a group of Native American coalition, as well as education advocates from across the state that are also non-Native. The group is trying to tap what is called New Mexico's Land Grant Permanent Fund. The best way to think about what the permanent fund is, it's like a savings account, big piggy bank. It takes in revenue from all of New Mexico's state land holdings. Predominantly, the majority of the money comes from oil and gas revenues. And so the Land Grant Permanent Fund is currently estimated at $25.5 billion. It's one of the largest in the country. And because of its immense size, propelled mostly by the increase in oil and gas revenues over the past several years, education advocates at this point think this is the time to get more of that money into education accounts statewide.
And this, of course, comes as so many Native leaders in New Mexico have been advocating for Native education because of the landmark lawsuit in New Mexico. How does that play into this?
Yes, and so, I mean, well, the advocates themselves are a coalition that was built out of what many know as Yazi Martinez here in New Mexico. This is a court-mandated education reform that was a judgment by a state court from 2018. And this is an avenue, not only because of the coalition building that came around that lawsuit itself, but they've developed enough political capital to just continue to push for education initiatives that focus predominantly on tribal community, tribal schools, Native American students who attend public schools in boarding towns. It's also for students with disabilities, students living in poverty, and students who are learning English as a second language. By some estimates, this actually accounts for more than 70% of public school students in New Mexico, Native and non-Native. And so this is just another step in the process of the groups that have been fighting these long court battles for decades. And now they're trying to use some of that in political capital and sway voters on an initiative that they think is going to pass and will pass overwhelmingly.
That's a great segue into my next question, because this ballot initiative will be voted on by voters all over New Mexico, not just ones who are Native. Do you think, based on your reporting, that this has a good chance to gain the support that it needs to pass?
You know, New Mexicans know that oil and gas revenues are at the highest they've ever been in the state. People want to see some return on that investment. There's a little bit of a fear from lawmakers who don't want to, you know, they're like really tight with their pennies. They don't want to dip into a savings account and we hit a downturn and oil and gas revenues dip, and then New Mexico doesn't have a way to pay for it. One thing that should be noted as well is that this permanent fund, the state already takes about 5% of that revenue each year. Last year, it was over $1 billion from the Land Grant Permanent Fund that went to pay for departments across the state, for youth services, for roads. 2/3 of it actually went to public schools. But New Mexico still needs a greater investment in schools. And I think voters recognize that that is just an essential element, especially coming out of a pandemic where learning loss was something that was substantial for some students. And while their gaps were kind of shortened during when in-person learning came back, that's another thing that this ballot initiative actually asks for. It wants to see an extension to the school year, arguing that students perform better when they're in classrooms. And that's something that a lot of parents and a lot of people in the community see as a value. And this is an election that is also it's a statewide election. So you're going to have voters primarily focused on a governor's race here in New Mexico. And that is going to bring out a lot of different types of voters here. We have two very popular candidates on the Republican and the Democratic side, a Democratic governor running for re-election. And so turnout is expected to be on par with what the state average is, which is usually for a state election around 65 to 70%. But education advocates think this is their time. And with the state's revenue being at record highs, this permanent fund growing, like for instance, 10 years ago, it was at $15 billion. And so it's grown over $10 billion in the past decade. And they're wondering why this isn't the time to start pulling more money from that.
I want to talk about one of the sources that you talked to, Regis Pecos, who is an education advocate, and he actually talked about how this is important for Native education on a national level. Tell us what he told you.
Yeah, so Regis Pecos has been at the forefront of this education reform for years. He's worked on the ground and creating programs for Native American students to advance in their either in college preparedness or in their professional career. And it's interesting to note that because of some of the groundwork he did with high school students who are now becoming a professional class, these are people that are now working with him, that are building coalitions, that are active in politics and law and business. And these are all people that can trace some of their roots working with Regis. So he wants to continue this, what he calls a watershed moment, that this is the time to actually reform tribal education in New Mexico to boost tribal education departments who are starting to work on their own. Sure, they receive federal funding, but in New Mexico, so many of our tribal education departments here are not federal. They do receive some federal money, but they are also run by the tribes themselves and work mostly autonomously and in conjunction with the state public education department. And so a lot of this money that could come from this land grant permanent fund, Regis and people like him want to see that go directly to tribal organizations to build capacity for administration, but also develop curriculum and continue to promote programs such as language immersion programs, beginning in pre-K all the way into high school.
Well, Sean, thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks for having me.
On Tuesday, federal lawmakers held their 7th public hearing on the January 6th attacks on the Capitol. ICT's regular contributor John Tasuda is back to break it down. He's a partner with Navigators Global. Welcome back, John.
Thank you. Thanks for having me again.
As I mentioned, this is the 7th public hearing. What are you taking away so far from watching and tuning into what people have to say?
I'm a little curious about what people think around the country. Obviously, it's splashed on the news here constantly in Washington, D.C. So it'd be interesting to know, what people around the country think. I think, there's an interesting dynamic that happens in these, and I think in some respects, the committee would like to think that they, are doing something such as the Watergate hearings, et cetera. But I think they're coming close to stepping over a line that will not be helpful. And that's when you have a situation like happened. You have people that committed criminal acts, and we have a professional agency called the Department of Justice, which is charged with prosecuting those crimes. But it becomes difficult for them and when these public hearings are held over the same matters in which they want to prosecute individuals. And I speak from a little bit of experience on this. I did a lot of work during the Abramoff investigations, and we were very careful, even though we did try to bring attention to something that a lot of people didn't know happened. The sort of rip-off of Indian tribes and that Mr. Abramoff and his colleagues did. But we stepped very carefully and worked very closely with the Department of Justice to make sure that we were not going to in any way interfere with the prosecution of those individuals. And I think I've heard rumors, and actually it's been in some of the newspapers here, that the Department of Justice is very concerned, with the I guess the in-depth positions that this committee is taking, and whether that will actually hurt them as they try to prosecute some of these individuals. So, that's sort of at this point my takeaway from that is it's one thing to bring some public attention to this, but at some point they have to step away, the congressional committee, and let the professional prosecutors do their job.
You know, what I've been really curious about is how much Indian country is really tuning into these hearings. I mean, so often we talk about the many issues that plague Native communities, and I just wonder if Native people are really, listening and paying attention. Have you heard anything?
Um, I haven't heard a lot. What I have heard has been sort of amused observations. As you know, we have sometimes some highly contested elections in our tribal communities, and we have sit-ins, we have things, and unfortunately, we have had some violent confrontations in the past. Navajo Nation was one number of years ago. People went to prison over some actions that were taken revolving around the elections and whatnot there. So, I think, we have some experience with that. And I think, again, a lot of the folks that I listen to, it seems like they're sort of observing what's going on here with a little bit of amusement. The notion that it can happen to other folks, I guess, is part of it.
Absolutely. Well, John, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And that's a slice of our Indigenous world. For all the latest, visit ictnews.org. From all of us in the newsroom, stay safe, my relatives. I am Aaliyah Chavez.
Sometimes you got to take a stand just because you know you can. Oh, you got to run, you got to run.
ICT News is produced by Indig Public Media.
This program is made possible in part by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, a private corporation funded by the American people.